Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, welcoming you to show number 69. This is brought to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and of course with video on YouTube. This is Star Wars weekend, and I am dressed appropriately for those of you who can see my shirt. Saw the movie this opening night, Thursday night, and was very, very happy with it. I actually posted a review on my movie channel, so if you want to check that out, I think you won't be disappointed. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are seeing the movie this weekend. Really good stuff. And another announcement that I want to make is that this last weekend, I went out to LA and I am on Leah Remini's show, Scientology and the Aftermath. And for those of you who are interested in that sort of thing, I think you'll find it interesting that I am going to be on TV. First time ever. You know, I've been on the internet for quite a while. I've been on different podcasts and shows, but I have not been on TV. So this will be very, very exciting for me. That'll be Monday evening. It'll be a special bonus episode. Leah's show is Scientology and Aftermath has been really a tour de force. It has been an awesome show and exposure of the subject of Scientology. And this is a bonus episode that they're doing. It's been on Tuesday nights, but this show is going to be on this Monday. So just 2 days from now. And it'll air at usual time on A&E, so check your local listings for that. And of course, it'll also be available on anetv.com. And I'm sure people will upload it and whatever if you don't have access to cable A&E. This special show was put together for a Q&A episode. Now, if you guys have followed my channel, you know I do a weekly Q&A episode, and I think that might be one of the ideas as to why they thought to ask me to come on the show for that, because we answer questions about Scientology in this episode with Leah Remini. So again, a can't miss. Really got to catch up on that show if you have not. And now for this podcast, we're going to talk about science and knowledge. And this may not be as long as usual. I'm not really sure how long this is going to go for, but I wanted to put some word out about this. Science is a broad global topic. It has to do with figuring out how and why things work or why they do what they do. Objective facts are not nationalistic, politically partisan, gender-based, or in any other way biased one way or the other. You can use facts in a partisan fashion or spin them to support your views when they really don't, but that's on you, not the people who actually do the observation or discovery work. Now, one great definition of science that I found is this: the concerted human effort to understand, or understand better, the history of the natural world and how the natural world works, with observable physical evidence as the basis of that understanding. It is done through observation of natural phenomena and/or experimentation that tries to simulate natural processes under controlled conditions. Now, because science, like every other thing we do, is carried out by us, fallible human beings, it's fraught with errors and mistakes. But that doesn't mean the process itself is bad or corrupt or evil. It means we are. And that means that when we talk about the problems with someone's faulty science, we should be talking about that specific person or that fault, not generalize it into all science is bad. Now, like when we get a sweater with a loose thread, we don't blame the entire subject of knitting or sewing and say it's stupid and wrong and inherently corrupt and no one who does stitching knows what they're doing. We just know that someone screwed up and we fix the sweater. And it's no different with science. Now, we're going to dive into some science and some knowledge stuff that I think you guys are going to find kind of interesting. I got some help this week from a friend and supporter of the show. And he pointed out some things and gave me some great direction on talking about science knowledge. And so I thought I wanted to share this with you. So first off, though, I do want to thank you, Nick, for your help. Now, when Alexander, king of Macedon, was young and wasn't yet called the Great, he had a tutor named Aristotle. For those of you who saw Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, you'll remember Socrates, Socrates, who lived back in the 5th century BC and who famously died drinking the hemlock because he annoyed one too many Athenians for corrupting the youth with his crazy religious and political ideas. In those days, you didn't just get a bad review on Yelp if people didn't like you. Socrates is remembered for a lot of things, one of them being that he felt that we were born with all of knowledge actually already within us, and we only needed to be reminded of it to remember it, mainly by asking us questions that would lead us, by their answers, down a trail of logic to an inevitable conclusion of truth. This is why asking people questions to get them to see something rather than telling them directly is called the Socratic method. Plato was Socrates' most famous student. He split up reality into ultimate reality and phenomena, or the manifestations of the ideal, which we can see and hear and sense. So while there might be an ultimate ideal of a triangle, which is perfect and unchanging and never flawed, there are manifestations of this ideal in our day-to-day world, which could be a little crooked, or the angles might not be right, or somehow it's not perfect. Plato was the first that I know of who spoke about this philosophy of knowledge, of how to describe the world around us and to say that there were standards or rules for things which exist outside of our day-to-day experience of them. Plato also put forward the interesting idea that the physical world strives to be ideal, including you and me. Our souls, according to Plato, are drawn to do good and what's reasonable, which of course is limited only by our knowledge and our understanding. If we do a bad thing, it's only out of ignorance and requires education, not punishment, to fix it. And now, getting to Aristotle, he was Plato's most famous student, and he also served the grandfather of Alexander the Great. He tutored young Alexander for 4 years before going back to Athens and establishing a school of philosophy and pretty much inventing our modern system of logic. So there's a legend that one day Aristotle and Alexander went for a walk. As they were strolling through the palace gardens, Alexander asked, "Teacher, your knowledge is so much greater than mine, yet you are unsure about things more often than I am. Why?" Aristotle stopped and drew 2 concentric circles in the sand with his staff. "The inner circle," he said, "is your knowledge. The outer circle is mine. It's easy to see that I have a longer line of contact with the unknown." Now, that's a legend. Diagrams featuring concentric circles, however, are still in wide use today. I'd like to mention one of them. In 1978, James Trefle, a physics professor and an author of popular science books, put forward a useful device for understanding the accumulation of scientific knowledge. His was slightly more complicated than Aristotle's because it had 3 concentric circles. The innermost circle is the core. Core ideas of science have been extensively tested in the past, repeatedly found workable, and thus are not under active scrutiny at present. In natural sciences, for example, core ideas include Newtonian mathematics, like the 3 laws of motion or gravity, atomic theory, conservation of energy and matter, and the theory of electromagnetism. Core ideas are usually taught in schools and bachelor programs as basics of science. Now, it's really important to understand that core ideas don't necessarily remain core forever. They're still open for challenge on the basis of new evidence. Nothing in science is sacred or forever. New discoveries can always influence or even replace old ones. Some core ideas change shape over time. Like electricity and magnetism used to be considered separate phenomena until James Clerk Maxwell unified them in 1861. Conservation of matter and conservation of energy also used to be considered separately until Einstein came up with E equals mc squared. Other core ideas get challenged, disproved, and thrown out altogether, like the geocentric model of the universe, where people accepted for centuries that the Earth was the center of not just our solar system, but the whole universe. I mean, it sounds silly now, but that's only because scientists actually used math and science to disprove that idea so thoroughly that the geocentric model had to be thrown out. This is also an important point about our nature. We cling to ideas that don't necessarily make sense for all kinds of reasons, and we are usually very slow to give them up. The progress of ideas over time is almost always a battle, and sometimes a bloody one. It'd be great if we were fully logical and rational in our thinking and didn't let our emotions get in the way, but we do. All of us do this, and this includes scientists and those who fight against scientists. It's just part of our nature that we can't really change, but we can at least try to recognize that our emotions can get in our way, and we can try to compensate for that. All right, now, if you move outwards to the middle circle, this represents the frontier of science. This is where modern science happens. Various hypotheses are proposed and tested. The process is discussed at conferences and research seminars and is documented in peer-reviewed publications. Two things can happen to a frontier idea. It can either gain acceptance and become part of the core, or it can be rejected as incompatible with evidence. Accepted ideas eventually find their way into high school and undergraduate textbooks, but this doesn't happen overnight. Now, usually, it takes decades. All right, now the outermost ring is the fringe. Now, this is a very strange place populated by ideas that cannot be convincingly proved or disproved. This could happen for a variety of reasons. Some ideas are formulated in a way that makes them hard to test. Others are simply hunches that are not supported by evidence, while others are viewed as implausible because of their perceived incompatibility with the core ideas. It's important to understand that not all fringe ideas are bad. A fringe idea can be reformulated in a way that allows us to test it. Evidence that might not be available today may become available tomorrow. The incompatibility with the core ideas could just be a perception. It might not really be real that they're incompatible. Simply put, a fringe idea can develop into a frontier idea. It can even be catapulted straight into the core if it makes non-trivial predictions that are later confirmed. One of the best-known fringe ideas of all time is the Big Bang. Even its name comes from its initially fringe status. The name was coined by the British astrophysicist Fred Hoyle, who also wrote sci-fi. And he detested the idea, and he wanted to give it a funny name to make it easier to ridicule. The idea of the Big Bang was born out of disagreements that some physicists had with Einstein. Einstein had a preconceived notion of a stationary universe. And when he described the set of equations that described the universe, he figured it was a stationary universe, and so he stopped looking for any other solution. But other physicists found solutions with physics and with equations that implied that the universe was expanding. And Einstein was like, yeah, I don't think so. But a part of the problem was that Einstein's detractors didn't have the same stature he did. Alexander Friedman was a government official from Soviet Russia. Georges Lemaitre was a part-time lecturer in physics and a priest from Belgium. And Einstein corresponded with both of these guys, but he wasn't really convinced. And yet, in a face-to-face conversation with Lemaitre, Einstein simply said, "Your math is correct, but your physics is abominable." Now, why was Einstein so obstinate? Simply because at the time, there was no observational data that could prove him right or wrong. As long as this remained the case, every physicist was free to subscribe to any mathematically feasible solution of Einstein's equations. So, what did it take to convince Einstein? Not much, really. Only the biggest telescope in the world, the 100-inch Hooker telescope, which was perched on top of Mount Wilson in California. No other instrument in the world had the necessary precision. Also helpful was the fact that the man in charge of the telescope was none other than Edwin Hubble. And if you've heard of the Hubble telescope, it's named after him. Anyway, as soon as the observational data was in, Einstein changed his mind immediately, and so did most other prominent doubters. Hoyle, by the way, never did accept it. The Big Bang quickly moved from the fringe to the core. Now, every now and then, strange things happen. Some fringe ideas remain so nebulous that it's not clear how or if they can be tested. Others get tested and rejected. But rather than retreat into oblivion, those ideas continue to roam the fringe like zombies, neither dead nor alive. One reason those zombie ideas are able to stumble around for ages is that they get a following among non-experts. Sometimes there's also a formally qualified proponent, like a scientist or a group, with a connection to a funding source. Follow the money. Here's one example of how a zombie idea survives. Back in the mid-1980s, a group of Soviet physicists led by Anatoly Akimov and Gennady Shipov proposed a torsion field theory. And the idea with this was the implications of this theory for technological progress could be enormous. At the very least, they said, it was possible to significantly reduce power transmission losses. They also claimed the possibility of faster-than-light travel and communication, anti-gravity, and rejuvenation of human beings. Exactly which Soviet government official they convinced to fund their efforts is probably never going to be known. But even a simple chronicle of events would make your head spin. Initially, torsion field research was classified. That was reversed in 1989, and the research program continued in a declassified mode. In 1991, the whole thing was exposed as a waste of government funds. Embezzlement charges were a possibility, but fortuitously, the Soviet Union just fell apart in the nick of time. Suddenly, everyone had more important things to do, and embezzlement charges never materialized. But corrupt bureaucracies seem to outlive empires, and in 1992, torsion field research began to receive government funding again, this time from the newly formed Russian Ministry of Science. In 1996, the funding source shifted to the Russian Ministry of Defense, and in 1997, the whole thing was classified again. After that, it gets a little difficult to trace the happenings, but sometime in the 2000s, the effort found a new home in Thailand, where it supposedly operates 2 research institutes under an umbrella of a private foundation. The exact extent of the effort is unclear, but the idea lives on. Now, I wanted to throw this stuff out there because I was curious what kind of zombie ideas you guys see still wandering aimlessly around on social media platforms or on the History Channel. Believe me, these zombies are really hard to kill. Kind of like rumors that Corona beer is actually piss water, or that when you buy any product from Procter & Gamble, you're actually supporting Satan worship. A lot of what we call woo, in other words, bad science or pseudoscience that is mostly used to sell things, falls into the zombie camp. For example, homeopathy is a totally bullshit alternative medicine practice invented in 1796 by Samuel Hahnemann, which promotes that disease symptoms can be treated by minute doses of substances that produce similar symptoms when provided in larger doses to healthy people. In other words, let's say you're going to treat a pollen allergy. You take a tiny bit of pollen and you put it into water, and then you dilute with more water to such an extent that you can't even detect the pollen in the water anymore. I'm talking about a ratio of like 1 bit of pollen in a lake. Then you have people drink that water and tell them it will cure their pollen allergy. This has been disproven over and over and over again to the point that finally in November of this year, the Federal Trade Commission had to demand that homeopathic treatment producers put labels on their products stating that there is no scientific evidence that they work. Now, this may or may not result in beheading that particular zombie, but I'm not holding my breath. All right. Well, I hope that this episode was interesting, and I would very much like your feedback in the comments section or on YouTube or on my sensiblyspeaking.com website. And of course, this being the season of love and holiday cheer, I would also like to ask that you either check out my Patreon campaign and throw me some love that way by becoming a Patreon supporter for me and my channel, or check out my critical merchandise website, which is linked on the sensiblyspeaking.com website or linked here on YouTube. Thanks for coming around. I know that this was a shorter episode than usual, but I hope that this was informative for you and gave you some information that you can use. And like I said, I'd love to hear your zombie science or zombie fringe ideas, because I think there might be some pretty interesting stuff floating around out there that I haven't heard of, and I'd love to hear about it. Thanks for coming around, and I'll see you guys next week.